yeah, we're going to get started in a minute, but I would like to take a moment to just remind everybody we have Memorial Day coming up. So make sure if you get a chance or know someone who has lost a loved one serving our country, maybe you reach out to them and say hello. And just a thank you to all of you who do serve in our military. Just thank you. I'm getting a phone call and I can't make it stop. Oh. All right. All right, let's get started. So today we have a treat. We have two guest speakers. We have Miss Elaine Anderson and Miss Jayne Stotts. Elaine has been in the insurance industry for 20 years, primarily adjusting property claims. She has been with Assurant for 9 years, where she was trained to handle flood claims after Superstorm Sandy. When Elaine commented to the vice president that she loved working flood claims, well, that was it. Since then, Elaine has specialized exclusively in flood claims. In her role as senior flood adjuster, Elaine has been involved in the development of new products and procedures, training, mentorships, CAT team management, and flood litigation, and still regularly handles flood claims. She works from home in Tucson, Arizona. Jayne Stotts. Jayne began her career in insurance in December of 1980, working for American Reliable Insurance Company, underwriting mobile homes and low-value dwellings. In 1984, she moved back to Nebraska to help family. In 1986, Jayne and her husband moved to Amarillo, Texas, where she worked for an agency in their commercial lines unit. Due to the economy, they returned to Phoenix area, where she was rehired by American Reliable, American Bankers, working in the personal lines unit. She obtained her agent's license in 1989 and moved to the flood unit in February of 1992. During her 33 years with Assurant, Jayne has held various positions such as underwriter, quality control and remote auditor, flood trainer, and is currently the supervisor for flood underwriting and operations. She has also obtained her CISR, AINS, and ANTFI designations. She is married to her husband of 41 years and has lived in Arizona most of those years. They don't have children, but they do have a spoiled standard schnauzer named Ilsa. Please welcome our guest speakers, Elaine and Jayne.
Welcome. All right.
Thank you.
Let's see. I think whoever has a presentation you should be able to start sharing. So I'm going to stop sharing here, and yep, there you go. Perfect. We can see it.
Okay, thank you. I just had to figure out how to get off mute. Thank you, Craig and Julie. Super excited to be here. As you heard, we've got one of our underwriting superheroes with us today. So I'm super excited that we get to hear from Jayne and get some of her knowledge as well. Again, any questions that you guys have, put them in the chat box. And then also at the end, we've left some time for Q&A as well. So hopefully everyone can see my screen. Let's see here. All right. So today we're going to talk about underwriting referrals and alerts. On our side, we tend to call them underwriting reformations. It's all the same thing. So if you hear me use different terminology, just know, I mean, it's all the same thing. This is from the NFIP claims manual. What I really want to stress throughout the presentation, the sooner you can get an underwriting alert to us, the better it is for everybody involved, for you, for us, our underwriters, especially our policyholders. The soonest we can get those, the quicker we can get them turned around. And that's also what FEMA and NFIP wants us to do as well. So you have a lot of information to verify for these underwriting alerts. You can find them throughout the different assignment sheets. They're in the claims management system. And then also the deck pages are available to, I guess, your office personnel. So there's a lot of different sources to get the information that you're going to be verifying. What do you want to verify? obvious ones: name, property address, mailing address. The name and the mailing address are kind of easy fixes. The property address, that's a big one. If there's any discrepancy in a property address, make sure you get that to us right away. Sometimes those have to go to NFIP. And if you've ever dealt with an address reformation with NFIP or FEMA, it can take months. So we really want to make sure that we can get those resolved right away. Mortgage company discrepancies, policy forms. Sometimes we'll see a commercial building, but it's insured on a dwelling form. Anything like that, make sure you send that over for underwriting review. Flood zones, you guys are really good at finding if there's been a flood zone change or if our property is rated in the incorrect zone. Definitely keep getting those to us. Any sort of occupancy information. And then the most important one besides a property address is going to be any sort of building information. The foundation, is it pre-firm? Is it post-firm? Is it elevated or not? Additionally, date of construction, that can also change how the claim is adjusted. And principal residency, that especially is important if we're dealing with somebody who may or may not qualify for replacement cost. So make sure, again, get those discrepancies to us early in the claim cycle. If you can provide clear, descriptive photos, CNC does a great job of giving us a lot of photos with our preliminary report, and we send those photos right over to our underwriters. So we need clear, descriptive photos, and then we need any sort of supporting documentation you can get from the policyholder, death certificates, a mortgage statement if there's a change in mortgage. We have seen some people have new elevation certificates, especially if they've been through an ICC claim, right? And now their home is elevated. We don't always have that on file, and we should. So any supporting documentation is especially helpful in working through the flood reformation or underwriting reformation process. All right, so I've got a little quiz here. This is an underwriting report that we got on a claim telling us that this property was not rated with a basement, but has a basement. Now, in the narrative, we also read that this policyholder is deceased. I would love to say that examiners read every single narrative, every single word on every single claim. We know that that doesn't always happen. So definitely any situations like this, we want to also have this as part of an underwriting alert. We send these underwriting reports directly to our underwriting team. So, we're going to read it, they're going to read it, and nothing's going to be overlooked if it's all in one report. So we definitely want to make sure, and if you have to send us multiple reports, that's okay. But we definitely want to make sure that everything is being addressed. And, there's a lot. You guys have a tough job. It's a lot you have to verify. All right. So looking at this particular building, I want you to think about this foundation and what type of foundation this building has. But before we kind of discuss this, I'm going to hand it over to Jayne, and she is going to walk us through the most important part of our presentation. We're going to do a refresher on foundations. So thank you, Jayne.
All righty. Thanks a lot, Elaine. So foundations, these can really be tricky. We deal a lot with foundations in the underwriting department. So what do we look for? How do we identify if any action is needed? Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. And we're going to start off looking at slab foundations. Now, slab foundations are one of the less complicated foundations that we deal with. It's pretty easy to see when you look at these photographs. A slab foundation basically is created by digging about a foot or so into the ground where the house is to be located, pouring concrete into that area, and then reinforcing it with either rebar, steel bar, something of that type. The house is then constructed on top of the concrete foundation, of course. The foundation type is called a diagram 1A, according to the FEMA elevation certificate. The slab foundations lack crawl space. There's no air space under the floor under the concrete floor because it's sitting on the dirt. And again, as you can see in the photos, it is a flat foundation. These are probably one of the easiest foundations we deal with as underwriters. Next slide. The next foundation we're going to talk about are stem walls. So stem walls are also slab foundations. Sometimes you'll hear the terminology raised slab. So a stem wall, their structures, these are used to connect the foundation of a building to its walls. Predominantly, it's constructed concrete footings with masonry walls. They rise above the ground level to provide a raised platform for placing the building slab. These can vary and range from 2, 3, or even 4 feet in height. There is no airspace in this area. The stem wall is filled in with leftover dirt, cement, gravel, can even be sand. And usually it's reinforced with rebar to help reinforce the wall area. And as you can see in these photos, I had surveyor tell me one time that whatever is left from, whether it's building or whatever it is, they crush up the rock, gravel, whatever, and they put it inside this area to fill in the walls of the stem wall, and it reinforces the slab. And we see this sometimes in areas maybe where they're a little more prone to pooling or some type of flooding. So they don't have the risk of the structure floating away or being knocked off its foundation quite as easily. Next slide. Basement foundations. Now, basement foundations, this sometimes is hard to determine. So from the photo, you can see that the area goes below ground, and it does need to go below ground on all 4 sides of the building. That is the National Flood Insurance Program, or the NFIP's definition of a basement. Now, with a basement, it can be conditioned, heated, or cooled like the rest of the house, or not heated or cooled, unconditioned. A full basement consists of structural foundation walls that bear on foundation footings running along the perimeter of the basement. Keep in mind again that all 4 sides are below ground, even if only one side is 0.1 foot below the lowest grade adjacent to the building, it is still below ground. Moving on to our next, we're going to talk more about slab foundations, but this one is called a split level slab. Typically, FEMA looks to see, how many levels to the building there are. Usually with the split level, think of a T on its side. So the building is built from the slab upward, meaning the slab supports the entire building, that all sides are on a slab. There are times when a dual foundation could be present. So you might think it's a diagram 3, a split level, but upon further inspection, it's found to have a crawl space elevating a portion of the home. In these photos, when I say the T level, you can kind of see where you have like a 2-story on one side and a single level that is centered between the 2-story on the other side. And you may have kind of a mid-level entry area where you walk into the home. Those are usually signs that it could very possibly be a split level building or foundation. In some areas, you might hear them referred to as bi-levels, tri-levels, that type of thing. Still with the split levels, then we have the one, it's a split level, but it could have a basement foundation area. Again, so these are ones that you have to be careful. And this is where photos really come in handy as well. When we look at the photo in the front on this, you can see there is a subgrade area based on the front of the photo. A rear photo would confirm whether or not the whole bottom area is below ground. And this is one reason why the NFIP asked for the front and back photos. So with the split level basement, or a diagram 4, It's a combined definition of a basement and a split level slab. One side of the home must be below the ground on all four sides, has to meet the definition of a basement. And again, think of the T that we saw on the previous on its side, but picture also a basement with part of that. So these split levels, again, sometimes they're a little hard to follow, but just remember with split levels, they are built from the ground up. The slab is supporting that building, whether there's a basement or whether it's, just above ground from a slab upward. Now, these top four foundations we just looked at, these are all considered non-elevated buildings. These next few that we're going to look at, we're going to move on to elevated buildings, and these can be a little more trickier. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So one of the easiest, I always say this, to me, they might be easy, to others are not so easy, but a diagram 5 is one of those that all of the underwriters love to underwrite, because when you look at these photos, there's not a whole lot that you're looking at. You see a building raised off of the ground, and it's raised from the ground up. So you can clearly see how the home is raised or how it's elevated. There's no obstruction. There's no storage units, anything of that kind underneath the building. So it's totally open. There's nothing that's enclosed. The bottom photo also shows a mobile home, which I have agents that will say to me, well, how can a mobile home be an elevated building? Forgetting that when you pull away that vinyl skirting on the bottom, it is totally open, or it should be totally open underneath. So a mobile home is considered elevated without an enclosure if it has standard skirting such as vinyl or aluminum. The skirting must also be aligned in a track, so when water pressure is exerted on it, the panel would pop off the track, basically open up, so the water flows freely underneath the mobile home. Now we're going to go on to elevated buildings, and this is where it gets a little more difficult. So elevated with enclosure is diagram 6. So note the difference between the photos here than what we saw in the previous photographs, a diagram 5 where it's open underneath versus a diagram 6 where it is not. So again, this is where it becomes more complex. We have to see how it is elevated and by what source. Also, to be elevated with an enclosure, we need to know the distance between the lowest enclosure floor and the next higher floor. If it is more than 5 feet, it is considered by the NFIP that it is then an enclosure. If it is less than 5 feet, it is classified as a crawl space. If there's a large difference of almost 2 feet or more between the enclosure floor and the ground, then we have to verify why the difference. We need to determine, is it on a thick slab? Is it on posts, piers, piles? And were they placed first, then a slab poured after, or are they sitting on top of the slab? Are there flood vents present? In the top photo, you can see that there are vents that go along the side of the bottom, close to the ground. If venting is present, the bottom of the opening must be within 1 foot of the ground or enclosure floor. It can't be blocked or need manual intervention in order to open, such as a lever or hinges where it has to be pulled open during a flooding event. If they are that type of vent, then they are not considered proper venting. Okay, our next slide. So quiz time. So this is an example in the photos to the top right that told us and an engineer that this structure was elevated on masonry piers. In fact, when I first saw that, the first thing I thought was, oh, it's an elevated building. The insured insisted this was a slab foundation. And in the end, the insured was able to provide the bottom photos, which showed the slab foundation was poured first. This is when these really are complex and where we have to do a little more due diligence in finding out, is it a walkout? Is it an enclosure, or is it considered slab? The masonry pillars, they're built on top of the slab, making this a slab building for rating, thus allowing us to cover a loss that actually did occur. Before, we thought this was an enclosure, and of course there's limitations with enclosures when there's a loss. So you can see down here at the bottom on the left photo where they poured the slab, and then you can see here on the bottom right photo where they actually put the pillars on top of the slab, thus making this a slab on grade building, which totally changes how we rate. We rate from down here instead of possibly rating from the elevated floor, and changing how the coverage then would apply. So we're going to move on now to elevated on solid foundation walls or a walkout basement, diagram 7. These again are another complex foundation, and this is one that is very confusing with our underwriters. We get that with split levels, we get this with diagram 7s. It's hard sometimes to determine what is the correct foundation. So if you apply the rule of what was done first, it will help identify whether this is a slab or it's not a slab. The main rule to consider is always, was the slab poured first and the solid foundation walls built on top of the slab? If they are supported by a slab, they are a slab. This is a slab foundation. Or were the footers poured, the masonry blocks connected and stacked on top of the footers, completing one level that is at least 5.1 feet or higher from the floor, the enclosure floor to the next higher floor. The slab is poured in to fill in that area between the wall space. If that were the case, then we are talking about a diagram 7, and it would be considered an elevated building. So note these photos. Generally, the main use of the building is the higher floor or the second story, with the bottom area being used mainly for building access, parking, or storage. And with the diagram 7, a portion of the floor may be below ground up to 3 walls, but not all 4. Again, if all 4 walls are below ground, we have a basement. And there is access to walk out at ground level. This is your typical diagram 7. The next thing next foundation is a crawl space. And this one is classified as a diagram 8. And with what we've learned from the 2 previous diagram numbers, crawl spaces use similar elevator rules. So when determining whether a crawl space, the difference between the crawl space floor and the next higher floor must be 5 foot or less. So note the photograph showing the inside of a crawl space. With the other 2 diagram numbers, diagram 6 and 7, they were 5.1 feet or higher. That's the difference in the diagram numbers is, the distance between floors. With the diagram 8, the crawl space is generally at grade on 1 or more sides, and we do always count it as a floor for rating unless it has proper flood venting. And the next, and usually the last foundation that we see is subgrade crawl spaces. These are below grade crawl spaces or diagram 9. So a subgrade crawl uses what we call the 2 foot, 5 foot rule. And what that means is the crawl space can't be below the ground on all sides more than 2 feet. And it can't be more than 5 feet to the next higher floor. If it is below ground 2.1 feet or more, it is considered a basement. If it is within the 2 feet below the ground, but more than 5 feet to the next higher floor, again, it is considered a basement. A subgrade crawl space with flood vents is never considered properly vented. We always rate from that floor. With flood vents, they would allow water to pool in that area. Note, if the crawl space extends below the grade like by 0.1 feet on all 4 sides, even then it is still considered below grade. The NFIP is very particular about anything that is subgrade. I had a auditor tell me 0.1 is below, is below, is below, is below, so it is below. All right. The next thing and last foundation we're going to talk about are dual foundations. These are exactly as they sound. It's a combination of different foundations. We see this at times where a portion of the building is elevated on a crawl space and the rest may be on a slab. Or as shown in this example, this building has a subgrade crawl space and it also has a basement. Since the basement is the lowest of the two foundations, rating would be as a basement and we would rate from the basement floor. The rule to remember when you see this scenario or issue, the lowest foundation floor is the floor used to identify the foundation type. If you are unsure what the foundation should be based off of the claims documentation, this would be a really good time to identify an alert or claims reformation. And next slide, so quiz time. So in this photograph, you can see, there we go. You can see where there's kind of a negative flow. You can see where the road, everything is kind of slanting down a little bit down the hill where we see kind of a truck box or something underneath the awning there. This claim was adjusted without a basement restriction. It was correctly rated as a basement. And as you can see, this really, truly is a basement because of how the ground slants down. And you do see that the building does sit above ground on some of the sides, but where you walk into the building itself, you're actually going down below the ground to get into the building. So you have to really be careful and make sure that when you get buildings such as this one, that you're really looking at all sides of the building. Whenever you step down into an area, so you're stepping from ground level and you're stepping down steps, going downstairs, whatever, is it, think in the back of your mind, am I going below ground? Is this typically a basement according to the NFIP rules and the foundation types? And then Elaine, did you have anything more you wanted to add to this one?
No, thank you, Jayne. I think you covered it, and I know I've learned more about foundations. I'm always confused by the 2 foot, 5 foot rule, so it's good to have that clarified. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Just to do a quick recap, there's a lot that we expect of you guys, your adjusters. You're out in the field dealing with the policyholders, adjusting their claim, and then we're asking you to verify all of this information on top of it. So we definitely appreciate the hard work that you guys do, the customer service that you provide to not only our policyholders, but us as well. When in doubt, send us up an underwriting alert. We would really like to get our underwriters' eyes on it. If it turns out that it wasn't needed, that's not a big deal. We would rather have them reviewed and confirmed before we, commit to coverage we shouldn't have, or don't change something that we should have changed. And then also, it's okay to request a surveyor or an engineer, especially any sort of foundation type disagreements. Jayne showed you an example where we even had an engineer come out and say that he thought a particular building was elevated and it turns out it wasn't. So sometimes we just have to do a lot more investigation and research, and it's okay if we need to get an expert involved to assist us with that. I will tell you on the appeal end of things, when we get an appeal from FEMA regarding a foundation type dispute, one of the first things FEMA says is, what'd your engineer say? What'd your surveyor say? So we would really like to get those issues, addressed. It's in the best interest of us and our policyholder right away before anything goes to appeal. So thank you guys for your time today. That is our presentation, but we are happy to answer any questions or concerns, and we'll turn it over.
I'm trying to get my computer's working. Okay, we do have one question. What is the difference between an alert and a claim reformation?
Sorry, there's no difference. It's just a terminology. You guys send up an alert. Some companies call them a referral. Internally, when we send them over to our underwriting team, we send them over to a reformation team. So and they will then, if warranted, reform the policy. So I guess that's why they call it reformations, but it's the same thing.
Okay.
So we have
Actually,
another
that's
one.
all.
We have
Sorry?
another one real quick.
Okay.
So actually, Wendy Stroh has a question, and I'll let her actually ask it. So I'm going to unmute her for a second here. I think it is did. Wendy, you should be unmuted. So
Hi. Hello, I'm unmuted now. Hi, Elaine. Hi, Jayne.
Hello.
Welcome. Thank you so much for being here today. We love it when you come to Flood News at Noon and share great information with us. Basements are kind of, when you're talking about underwriting, basements are the big question for me. And so you mentioned something in one of your last slides, the photograph of the church, and pointed out that in the side that slopes down to the entrance, you use the term negative flow. And at times over the evolution of the program in the last decade or so, we've heard phrases come in and out of favor with FEMA, and negative flow has always been useful in describing, but we don't always, sometimes they'll tell us we can't use that as a standard for figuring out whether a side is totally below grade. So do you figure that, do you like that term? Do you rely on that? And is that something we can use when we're describing a building?
From the underwriting side, we don't use really the term negative flow. We basically use, is it subgrade? Is it below ground on all four sides? We pretty much follow the FEMA definition of what a basement is. I think negative flow is just more to help describe what we're looking at with the audience, but technically FEMA or the NFIP, they don't use that terminology. They pretty much just say, is it below ground? Meaning, do you step down into that area from the ground level?
And that stepping down was I have two claims that I handled in Houston with very similar situations. One was a church, one was an auditorium. And in both cases, you walk very clearly, definitively into the building at grade, and there is no step down. But at several feet in, both of them had a slope, a long slope down to the pulpit area, down to the stage area. And those claims were evaluated separately, and one was considered a basement and one was not.
Yes, I have heard of that. I especially with an auditorium type situation or theater, we will get that because they have to look at the lowest floor of the building. And so whatever the lowest point is inside, is that where it's, below the ground level.
Right.
You may walk straight in. We had one that was a library where from street level, you walked into this little step down area and then you went into the library. It was considered a basement because of that step down area. Even though it was outside the building, you stepped down to go into the basement area, and that whole area technically was below ground as well.
Right. It's never black and white. It's never easy.
No.
So I like your initial point was get these questions into you guys early and often and with lots of photographs and documentation. So we'll keep trying to do that for you.
Sounds
Great.
good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy.
thanks, Wendy. I do have a statement I would like to make real quick on one, just to kind of clarify that, when you mentioned the stem walls and the slab and that raised slab filled with dirt. We're going to go back to that. We're going to go back to that slide there.
This one.
That one right there. Just for adjusting purposes, this is not an elevated building. It's funny how many times I see, or shouldn't see, but people that you would think would know go, oh, the building was elevated. Like, okay, where are the vents? Where's the opening? How is it elevated? Post piers, pilings, columns, stem walls. Is there a space underneath this? Where's the void? I need to see this. Where's the documentation of this? Well, it was filled in. It's not an elevated building.
No.
That's a raised slab. That is not an elevated building. So there's no, and if there, and how would their coverage restrictions apply underneath there if it was filled with dirt? So I mean, and you know where I'm going.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I even have underwriters that confused. They'll send it over to me and ask if it's a crawl space.
Yeah.
I said, the surveyor says it's a 1B, which is a stem wall. Verify there's no airspace. If there's no airspace, it is a stem wall right from the top.
Can't be a crawl space because you can't crawl in it.
No, exactly. It'd be a little difficult.
Yeah. Which on our end as well, that's one thing, like when he was pointing out, and I think Elaine, you pointed out this as well, getting this information to y'all quickly. That's one thing we need to make sure we're doing on our end as adjusters is taking the right photograph to support that foundation. What is it? Specifically when you get into like a basement or an elevated building, it's kind of questionable, but always that information needs to be pushed out when the prelim is submitted up, so that, and at that point, if there is a question, if the loss notice is not matching what the adjuster sees out there on the property, then the underwriting report needs to go immediately with that as well. So that obviously, like you point out, Elaine, it's some of these things take time, and the longer that information wait to get to you all, that's time you add to your request that goes into FEMA or whatever, or whatever process goes from there. That delays the policyholder. That delays the policyholder getting some type of clarification on what direction they're going to take. And I mean, it come back and say, yeah, yes, this is covered, but that could be a month away, and we don't want that to happen. We want to obviously get that resolved quickly. So it really falls again back on to what is seen in the field. Because I mean, like I tell adjusters all the time, we don't have GoPro cameras stuck on their heads, so we can't see what they saw. So the more information we can get, the sooner we can get it, the better everybody is. That better the whole process goes. So,
absolutely, yeah. And ultimately, we want to provide the best service to our policyholder, and that helps us do that. So,
definitely. Julie, anything else out there?
Yes. I'm supposed to say, great job, Jayne and Elaine. I'm sure your boss is very proud of you.
Oh, thank you.
Is that from my boss?
That's from your boss.
Yeah.
All right.
It must be nice to have a really great boss.
Yes, Julie, go back to work. Good job.
It certainly is.
Good job,
Julie.
Wendy, are you still on break, Wendy?
My boss doesn't mind when I go to lunch.
I just really wanted to thank. Let me share my screen real quick so we can get this. So got one more. It's not showing. There we go. All right. So again, just Jayne and Elaine, thank you very much for taking your time to be with us today to present this information to us today on underwriting alerts and reformation, all that good stuff. That the more information obviously we can get from the field to you all helps that process a lot better. Because, as we discover when we go out as an adjuster, not every file is written exactly as the loss notice states. There's just things that, just get missed during the application process. And, we get out there and we see something completely different. And it's just, it's our job when we go out there we see that, to make sure we're getting the information to y'all. So this really gives us another good insight into your perspective on why you see things and how things are done, and helps us understand our role a little bit clearer while we go about and get this information in to you all. And also really thank you for your time for your expertise, but I also want to thank your boss, Miguel, for helping put this together. And, just all that he does behind the scenes, this just probably would not have taken place without him getting this information and helping put all this information together. But we really, truly enjoy working with y'all. Y'all are a great team to work with, great relationships, great friendships as well. We really appreciate y'all coming on, and just y'all really have a really good expertise out there in the flood industry that gives us that. It helps push that information to us, that we can do our jobs better for you all as well at the end. So really appreciate the time for that today.